So I want to welcome everyone here tonight, this very wonderful, joyous occasion. We love celebrating books. Universities are all about books, but we above all love celebrating books of great writers, and even more, great writers who are friends and who are frequent, who in this case is a frequent visitor to CEU. Kati Marton is a distinguished member of our Board of Trustees, and she has spoken frequently at CEU, and she does us the great honor on a regular basis of now, I think this is the third time, of launching her very successful books from our university when she is speaking about them in Hungary. So I'm very glad that we have the occasion to launch yet another one. Kati certainly needs no introduction here in Budapest and in most other places where I've had the privilege of introducing her. But it is a privilege to introduce Kati because in a way it's a way for me to pay her back for a great introduction she made to me, which was to introduce me to Hungary. And it was really through Kati and through her eyes and her experience that I first came to know about Hungary. We first met in a rather unlikely place some 18 years ago in a military barracks in Dayton, Ohio, in the Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. Now you're probably wondering what was that all about? Well, it was the Dayton Peace Conference. And I was then working with her late husband, Richard Holbrooke, who is also a dear friend, trying to end the war in Bosnia. I was a State Department official, and he was in charge of the whole peace process and the architect of it. Hungary was playing a very important role as a staging area at that time for NATO and as a destination for some tens of thousands of refugees, Bosnian and Serb refugees, who were coming to Hungary from this ghastly war that was being conducted throughout Bosnia at that point. But the Dayton peace process was all about the architects of that war, who Richard Holbrooke had creatively managed to bring together in this place, the Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, Milosevic, Tudjman, Izetbegovic, and others who were reporting to them. And he had brilliantly arranged to confine them in this place until they made peace. But he had difficulties, but he had a secret weapon. Now, the Wright-Patterson Air Force Base was a very tough spot. There was really only one restaurant. It was called Packy's Sports Bar. And it was like any sports bar that you've ever been into, with many, many televisions around the wall, etc. And it was where everyone met for dinner. And as the chairman of the peace process, it was Richard Holbrooke's responsibility and deep desire to bring together and get to talk together these architects of the war. And when they were particularly obstreperous, he would sit them down at dinner, and between them he would put Kati. And Kati was somehow brilliant in getting them to actually talk to each other. She may tell you a little bit about this in her remarks, or she may not, but you can certainly read about it in the book. I learned from her when she and I spoke during the times when she wasn't trying to bring peace to Bosnia with her husband, about the heroic role of her parents as reporters during the '56 revolution, and of course she herself has become a heroic international reporter in the years recently. Here at CEU, Kati is a great supporter of our university, and I want to just say one more thing to tie together this wonderful book, The Dayton Peace Process, Kati's late husband, Richard Holbrooke, and CEU. And I think it all can be done quite easily, and we are doing this by bringing something to life here at the university that is going to commemorate his very creative approaches toward diplomacy. As you might imagine, at the heart of my academic interests are international relations. And this year, we are launching a center on conflict resolution and the prevention of genocide to prevent more Bosnias, at least to study how to do that, and to teach and research about the kind of passionate, hands-on diplomacy that was practiced in Dayton and which Kati was very much at the heart of. We plan to establish a Holbrooke Fellows Program to carry forward this work, and I'm very pleased that this is something that I could mention as Kati launches this book here. I want to make just a few points about Kati's own biography, which all of you no doubt know or have read, as I introduce her. She's a distinguished international journalist, an author, human rights leader of great renown in the United States and Europe and across the world. She's been an award-winning former ABC News correspondent and a host of a national public radio series in the United States. She's the former head of the International Committee to Protect Journalists. She's received many awards over the years for her reporting and for her human rights work. She's, as I said, a trustee of CEU and a former trustee of the Human Rights Watch and many other organizations. And above all, she's the author of 8 internationally acclaimed books, including the one that we're having her talk about here tonight, Paris, A Love Story. One of her books is called The Great Escape, and it's about great Hungarians who had sought their success overseas. And there were 9 of them. And I would say Kati is the 10th. She is indeed a great Hungarian who has sought a great success and has brought much to the world from overseas, and now she returns to Hungary. And I want you to all join me in please welcoming her back to CEU.
Thank you so much. Thank you, John. I love John's introductions. I just wish they weren't so short. I was just really getting to enjoy myself listening to all those incredibly flattering things. Thank you. I'd like you to introduce me at every single event forevermore. Well, jó estét kívánok, kedves barátaim. Úgy örülök, hogy ismét itt találkozunk. I'm so happy to be back at CEU, my second home here, and I'm so proud of my connection to this great and increasingly important institution that John leads. It's I say increasingly important because the neighborhood that we are in does not get any less dangerous. And therefore, CEU's mission becomes more and more relevant. Its mission to make Hungary a center for big ideas and openness and a kind of a cross-fertilization of cultures and ethnicities, which it once was, and which created the eruption of talent, which I chronicled in The Great Escape, translated by Kunos László, my publisher at Corvina, to whom I owe my Hungarian literary life. This is the Paris book is the 6th book that Laci has published under Corvina, and Laci, I'm just immensely honored and grateful that you discovered me, and. By the way, the Great Escape, Kilenc Magyar, is I think a big success in this country, which makes me very, very happy. Not only because I wrote it, but also because I think that one way for Hungary to prevent a repetition of its extremely violent history is for its young people to not only to know the facts of its past, but to assimilate them and to draw conclusions from that. And so, therefore, I'm really pleased that the young people particularly are reading my books. This one is a little bit different. This one is a personal book, and it's a love story, as the English title says. The Hungarian title, and I had one of my very rare disputes with Laci on this, because I thought the Hungarian title, which is Párizs Szerelmeim, made it sound like the autobiography of Elizabeth Taylor. Because Szerelmeim, of course, means my loves. And anyway, it sounded like a catalog of my love affairs. And that's not how I want to be known. But then Laci persuaded me that I was missing the more subtle point about Szerelmeim. And indeed, it is about my loves. And first and foremost, my love for Paris, which has been really the fixed point in my rather disrupted and turbulent life. It was here in Budapest that my love for Paris was planted by an unlikely agent, the agent of the AVO, who was employed by my parents as my babysitter. And I did not like her, and she did not like me. And because I was the mischievous of the two sisters, and I kept telling my parents that this woman was not fit for her job. And indeed, the secret police files proved me correct. She was not fit for her job. She was reporting, she was an informer, using my sister and me as her sources, but she did teach me to love all things French, starting with the language. And so I was determined at the first opportunity to go to Paris, which I did at age 18, which happened to coincide with the second revolution of my life, which was the famous student protests of May 1968. And for me, this was not a great good time, as it was for most of my fellow students at the Sorbonne. This brought back extremely disturbing memories of what happened right here on the streets of Budapest when I was a little girl. And so I fled in sort of a semi-panic, because my neighborhood, which was the Latin Quarter, which is my neighborhood again, turned into a war zone. So I fled, but vowed to come back. And indeed I did. 10 years later, I came back as a correspondent now for ABC News. And so again, Paris played a huge role in my life and in my career. It was, I had my first big national story, which was covering Ayatollah Khomeini in exile. Like everybody else, I totally underestimated Khomeini's danger. I thought he was just a really grumpy old guy. And I will never forget, and I write this in the book, that one day all of us world media were camped in the Parisian suburb where he had spent his exile, the suburb of Neufle-le-Château, and our only shot at seeing him was when he shuffled every day from his little bungalow to his prayer tent. And then we would all precipitate ourselves in that horrible scrum that hungry reporters are famous for, and I was trying to say my stand-upper, as it's called, as he was passing behind me, and my cameraman Tony Hiroshiki suddenly stopped filming and put his camera down, and I went, come on, what are you doing? And Tony shook his head, and so I turned around, and there was Khomeini, like a dark cloud, glaring at me and gesticulating for me to cover my head. And basically, he ruined my broadcast, which was his intention. But after that, I found a scarf and continued my coverage of him with my head covered, and really kind of pissed off, frankly. Why should I cover this? This wasn't my religion, but what I did not realize was that this man who hatched the plot from the plot to turn Iran into an absolutist theocracy hatched it right there in those days in Paris, from where he was sending out videotapes, audio tapes, I should say, to rally his people in preparation for his return to Tehran. So that was the second chapter of Paris. And then the third chapter was when I came to know Richard. John spoke so movingly about Richard. It was in Paris, where all good things happened to me, where Richard and I started our lives together, and where during the last 2 years, when he had the toughest assignment of his career, Afghanistan and Pakistan, that was Paris became our meeting point, midway between Washington and Kabul and Islamabad, and so we had wonderful times there, and I realized my fantasy, which was to own a piece of Parisian real estate in the Latin Quarter, my first stopping place in Paris, and that is where I wrote this book. The genesis of this book is that that right after Richard's entirely unexpected and obviously tragic death, I started keeping a journal, partly because I couldn't sleep, partly because I wanted to record all the turbulence that I was feeling, and because how does a writer get through turbulence? By writing about it. And so this was my way. But death brings not only terrible grief, it also brings some very practical problems. And among those practical problems was that I had to leave my home of 25 years, the apartment on Central Park, where I had raised my children, and which suddenly seemed much too large and felt sort of like a museum of my life. And I knew that I couldn't rebuild my life living there, and on top of that, and maybe I should start with that, I couldn't afford it. So I started the enormous process of packing, and it was really akin to launching the Normandy invasion, leaving that place, because we had the accumulation of 25 years, 4 people's lives. And I started in the storage room of our building, and there I discovered a plastic bin marked in my father's handwriting, Kati's letters from Paris. And my father spent his final year living with Richard and me after my mother's death, and apparently he had brought this with him. And of course, I had zero interest in such old letters at the time when I was living my life, you know, on fast forward. But now I was interested, and so I carried this dusty thing upstairs and sat down and started reading the letters, and really came face to face with my 18-year-old self. A stranger to me. And also inside that bin was an envelope in Peter's handwriting, that is to say, the father of my children, Peter Jennings, who, when we separated after 15 years of marriage, apparently had returned the letters that I had written to him from Paris, when we were both correspondents. So I started reading, and these letters became sort of the spine of this book. And the combination of the journal and this unexpected windfall of letters really is what I owe this book to. And I would, if with your indulgence, I would like to read to you a short passage which I think captures the sort of flavor of the book, which is written in a very honest vein. I didn't see any point in writing a memoir if it wasn't going to be authentic. And so it's written in the tone of a long letter to a friend. And as to a friend, it is a very honest and not, I make no attempt to airbrush mistakes in my past, nor to make myself any more noble, or I wanted the reader to believe this book, and therefore it had to be authentic. My first two readers were my most important, and they were my children, because this was their story as well, and the story of their father. And I have never written about Peter, and so I held my breath as they read the book and waited for their judgment. I told them, if there's anything you don't like, speak up now or forever hold your peace. And they read it, they wept over it, and finally they said, Mom, that was Dad, and this is you, so don't change anything, which was a huge relief. So here's my first week as foreign correspondent. As my first weekend as foreign correspondent approached, Paris, so close, beckoned. I was in London, which is where foreign correspondents learn the ropes of the business, where they learn to satellite and all the other technical things. From my glass cubicle in the largely empty newsroom, I phoned my sister, Yuli, living in Paris. I could get in by late Friday, I told her. I'm already sick of hotel life. I said, longing for family and the domesticity of Yuli's Paris home and her new baby. And just who do you think is going to cover for you here? A disembodied voice passing by my office's open door growled. Me? Who's that? My sister asked. Sounds rude. Oh, that's Peter Jennings, I answered. Don't worry, I'll deal with him. See you Friday. Hanging up, I marched down the hall to the senior foreign correspondent's spacious corner office, crammed with tribal and war mementos, a colorful kilim on the floor, and a Syrian pearl inlaid table piled high with books on the Middle East and Africa. It all reminded me I was now in the lair of the man universally known as PJ, or more derisively, Peter of Arabia. Famous and improbably good-looking. Hi, I said, I'm Kati, the new girl. En route to take up my post in Germany as bureau chief, I added with emphasis. I know exactly who you are, Peter answered, barely looking up. And I also know there are two correspondents in the bureau at the moment, you and me. You are the weekend duty correspondent, which means that if anything breaks, you are on it. Did you think I was going to cover for you while you stroll around Paris? He said in one clipped Anglo-Canadian breath. I was reeling. He was a legend. I was the newest and youngest and probably the greenest foreign correspondent on the planet. I mumbled something about how quiet the world seemed and how I hadn't seen my sister in so long, and okay, well, go ahead, he shrugged. He was almost horizontal in his chair, with his feet propped up on his vast desk. I noticed he was wearing hush puppies, not Gucci loafers. I found this endearing. Don't blame me if something breaks, he said, sitting up suddenly and reaching for the phone. My time was up. He was soon chatting to someone he called Squire. I soon learned that all men were squire and all women darling in Peter's vocabulary. What a total jerk, I mumbled on the way back to my microscopic glass cage, and went off to Paris. In the taxi heading to my sister's place on the Rue Chardon-Lagache, I could hardly believe my good fortune. I was back, and not as a tourist, but as a bureau chief for ABC News. Paris preened from me on this crisp winter day. It was heaven to breathe that pungent air, already tinged with the smell of hot chestnuts, and bliss to descend with my sister and her baby into the familiar metro, its map still engraved in my memory like a poem. We tore by those stations named for historic battles, Solferino, Austerlitz, Stalingrad, but not Waterloo. That always unleashed my imagination. At the outdoor market in Passy, Yuli and I shopped for cheese and fruit before moving on to the splendors of the charcuterie. At my sister's place, unloading our string shopping bags in her kitchen, the telephone rang. It was Bill Mildyke, the London bureau manager. Kati, there's been an IRA attack in Belfast. For just a second, I couldn't remember where Belfast was. You've got to get there ASAP, he went on. It's a dog show, people and dogs injured. You'll make the evening news. Best you fly to Dublin, then make your way to Belfast from there. He sounded like he was speaking to an actual foreign correspondent, for whom getting from Paris to Dublin and thence to Belfast was like taking the DC-New York shuttle. Okay, Bill, I'll upcome from there when I get in, I said, recalling that everybody at the network was always upcoming from someplace. With my sister's help, I caught a plane to Dublin that afternoon. It was dark when I hauled my bag toward the car rental place for my onward journey into Northern Ireland and the war zone. A large smiling man intercepted me with a hearty, "You must be Kati, if I'm not mistaken." His name was Johnny, and he was the local Irish fixer, one of the network's unsung heroes who made the wheels go round for ignorant arrivals from New York like me. Peter called me and told me to meet you here. I'll try to make things easy for you. Let's go and get you to Belfast without getting either of us killed on the road. During that dark and anxious journey across no man's land, Johnny spoke with warmth about Peter. One of the great reporters, he said, and a good man, too. I checked into Belfast's fortress-like Hotel Europa. Now, miss, when the bombs fall, you follow these steps down to the cellar, the bellman explained, taking my bag. Waiting for me in the lobby was a tall, elegant man and his much shorter partner. "I'm Nicholas," the tall man said with a faint non-Irish accent. It turned out he was a Russian aristocrat and a legendary cameraman in the field. "And this is Didi, your sound man," he said, pointing toward a balding man who flashed the tobacco-stained smile my way. Didi was German and lit up his next cigarette while the one he was still working on was still going. "Peter called me," Nicholas said as we hopped in his van. "Not to worry. We shoot beautiful pictures. You make big story, I make you star." And so we did. On a weekend news show when not much was going on at home, a dog show in Belfast with more canine than human loss of life, I got more time than I deserved. Thanks to Johnny and Nicholas and Didi, we navigated Belfast no man's land. I interviewed masked gunmen I would later meet without their masks in suits and ties at the Council on Foreign Relations. I returned to London exhilarated. I had passed my first test, marching into Peter's corner office with my hand extended. I thanked him. "That's okay," he said. "Let's start again." He asked me if I liked Gilbert and Sullivan. I lied and said, "Sure." But here's a problem. British Air has lost my bag in Belfast. I have only the clothes on my back. The rest I'd already shipped on to Germany. Peter seemed to have a solution for any problem a foreign correspondent might encounter. Tell Mildyke you need an advance, then go to Harrods, buy yourself a couple of nice things. You'll need some tweeds, soft wool things. It gets cold here. I could feel him quickly and critically appraising my very untweedy American outfit. "You'd look good in a kilt too," he said. So began my makeover. Later I wondered if he had something to do with British Air losing my bag. Wearing my new heather gray suit, I waited for him to finish the live evening newscast. Off we went to Gilbert and Sullivan. Afterwards, by the way, it turned out not to be Gilbert and Sullivan. He hadn't looked very carefully. It was a modern dance troupe from Marseille. So after a few minutes, he said, "Let's get out of here. Let me take you to my favorite place for dinner." It was Bentley's off Regent Street, and we ate oysters and drank Montrachet, and Bentley's became our place. I think we were in love before the check arrived. Sorry. Thanks, John. I hope I have your attention. Let's see. The next night we returned to Bentley's. Peter was a creature of habit. And after a few glasses of wine, he said that we would produce beautiful and smart children together. This wild notion on our second evening together carried a serious undercurrent, which we both understood. And so began a passionate and tormented love story that lasted 15 years. And those children that we talked about on our second evening together are now grown and far wiser than their parents during their second dinner at Bentley's. So that was the beginning of the 15-year adventure with Peter. And so we flash forward now 15 years, and Richard enters. And our love story unfolded over the telephone. There was never a better talker than Richard Holbrooke. But the surprise was that he was a good listener, too. He installed a special phone line in his Bonn residence, and soon in Berlin as well. He was the American ambassador there at the time, and he didn't want the taxpayer subsidizing our long conversations. Sometimes they went on for 2 hours. They were the easiest conversations of my life. He was interested in everything: my children, my writing, my parents, and soon my painful divorce. His observations about the world were original and based mostly on his own experiences. I don't remember ever hearing him utter a cliché, nor did he let me get away with much. Be precise, he would say, in an attempt to tame my Hungarian love of a good story. Facts are sacred. He laughed when I used what he called a $10 word to impress him. Je jeune, he teased. Where'd you learn that word, refugee girl? I confessed to him to keeping a list of new words, as I was still self-conscious about my English. Now I had someone I could show off to. I began to follow the news differently. Through Richard, I felt that I was inside the room where events unfolded. And not only in the present, the players took on real personalities. I was no longer a journalist, my nose pressed against the window of big events. I soon felt that I knew Bill Clinton, Jimmy Carter, Lyndon Johnson, General William Westmoreland, Bobby Kennedy, and even FDR and Woodrow Wilson personally. It was exhilarating. But he was just as passionate about lower forms of art. We would watch David Letterman's show together, he in Germany through a special feed, me in New York. You cannot go to sleep until we hear Letterman's top 10 list, he would insist as I was dropping off. It was the purest courtship of my life. We had only the sound of each other's voices on the telephone. In a month's time, we were deeply enmeshed in each other's lives, thoughts, dreams, and ambitions. In those pre-email days, we faxed back and forth, sending things we were writing for the other's comments. It is hard for me to imagine getting through that period of hurt and disappointment, ending 15 years of marriage, without Richard's mellow, "Hello, Katika," at the day's end. That's a trick I was taught early on this book tour by somebody who saw that I would get emotional from time to time, understandably, who said, here's what you do. Always have water next to you, and when you think you're going to get emotional, just pretend you're thirsty. Okay. He was more easily moved by historic events than by human foibles. Years later, when he met the newly elected President Barack Obama in Chicago, he teared up at the enormity of the moment, shaking hands with our country's first African-American president. Richard did not think that this show of emotion went down well with Mr. Obama. After so many years expending emotional energy on my volatile marriage, I suddenly had energy to spare. I finished my 4th book, A Death in Jerusalem, also available in Hungarian, on the assassination of the first Arab-Israeli peace negotiator, Count Folke Bernadotte. I became chair of the Committee to Protect Journalists, and soon I started a new book. One night, as Richard and I were reluctantly winding up one of our long conversations, I said teasingly, well, maybe when you come home in a couple of years, we should try living together. Oh no, he answered, I'm too old for that. I did that with Diane Sawyer for 7 years. Okay then, I teased, I guess we just have to get married. The next morning, my fax machine disgorged the following note on the letterhead of the United States ambassador to Germany. Ambassador Richard C. Holbrooke accepts with great pleasure the offer of marriage to Ms. Kati Marton at a date to be determined. That was Richard. He always said, when you see a moment, pocket it. That was one of his in negotiating. He said, I'll never forget, John, when finally he got Dalia Izbegovic to sign the piece that he was so reluctant to sign. Richard was with Warren Christopher in Izbegovic's room, and Izbegovic was so reluctant because you call them heads of state. I call them war criminals. These were the people who started the Balkan Wars. At any rate, Richard whispered to Warren Christopher, let's get the hell out of here, and picked up, the guy wasn't even finished with his signature, and they just took off because they knew that if they hung around, Izbegovic would probably find a reason to stall. So he was the same way in his personal life. He saw the moment. I mean, for the rest of our time together, he always said that Kati proposed marriage. And I thought I was joking, but that letter on his letterhead sits today in a silver frame on my dresser. Later that winter, this was 1994, he joined me in Budapest, where I was working on a travel piece. Walking down the Andrássy Boulevard hand in hand, I felt that I was home, really home. This is not a sad book. I promise you, it really isn't. It's those of you who've read it, I think will agree that it's actually a very positive book. But it's as I've been telling my Hungarian interviewers for the last 2 days, it's about life, which is a full life, which has both great highs and great lows, and of course the measure of who we are is not how we deal with the highs. They're really easy to deal with. It's how we deal with the lows. And so I think I have a far better sense of who I am in the last 2 years. Yesterday, a very prominent Hungarian television personality, who shall remain anonymous, said to me on the air, Kati, te egy nagyon kemény valaki vagy. Kati, you're a very hard person. And I said, kemény? Bár keményebb lennék. I wish I were harder. But he meant that, you know, that I was able to write about such a deeply sad, I mean, the triggering event was so deeply sad. But in fact, the book is about what happens after sadness and the challenge for all of us, because sooner or later, some sad event, whether it's health or professional related, finds all of us. Nobody glides through life without such an event, unless you're living in a monastery and then you die of boredom. So it's really about attempting to reinvent your life after such an event, and that's I am hoping that encouraging theme is going to help Hungarians, as it is. I have to immodestly tell you that this book has had tremendous success in the United States. It's had 5 reprints since September, because I think that okay, I wrote this is my story, but it's really a universal theme. And it's the theme is that we may live in different circumstances. Richard Holbrooke was not an ordinary man, and therefore my life was not an average life. But the problems that we face are universal. Really, they're just minor. We lived in a different place, but we face the same problems and challenges. And sometimes it was tough being with such a public person, because I come out of the little shell where I write, and my books normally take 3 or 4 years. This one took a year because the story was my own, and therefore it really kind of almost wrote itself once I started writing. It's the first book I've ever written where I didn't submit a book proposal to the publisher, because I just said, you know, I really can't tell you what form this will take. because there's so many things that I want to weave into the story, the books, the travels, the remarkable personalities that I've had the very good fortune to get to know. Yes, Bill and Hillary Clinton, but also I think the greatest man of our time, Nelson Mandela, who stayed with Richard and me several times when Richard was ambassador to the UN, and who I found to be the single most inspirational human being, a man who emerged after 27 years of really a hard regime imprisonment, and with a serenity and a humanity that assured that South Africa would not break up into civil war. And my goodness, I kept contrasting the Balkan leaders with whom I spent time with, who could only focus on their own personal injuries and how he's a bigger war criminal than I am, and therefore he's the one who should be in at The Hague. And never, occasionally, Richard, when he hit a wall with one of these guys, would ask me to walk around the beautiful parking lot at Wright-Patterson. That's all we had as a walking place. I remember one such walk with Tudjman, Franjo Tudjman, who was no Thomas Jefferson either. And Richard said, Kati, make him talk about his children and what he wants for his grandchildren. Easier said than done. He wasn't interested in talking about his grandchildren or the kind of country that he wanted to leave behind. He was interested in holding on to power. Same with Izbegovic and same with Milosevic. These were warlords. And that was the most disillusioning experience for me, to the utter lack of interest in their own people. And really eye-opening as well, that because I see that trait so often in politicians who, even those who start out wanting to do good things for their people, become absolutely drunk with their own power. I interviewed Robert Mugabe early in his presidency of Zimbabwe, 1982, I think it was. When I was still working for ABC. And wow, he was a dazzling character. He was so smart and so well-spoken and literate and had such big dreams for that gorgeous country. I don't know how many of you have traveled to Zimbabwe. It's an absolute jewel of a country. Now wrecked. He's 89 and unwilling to leave, and still rounding up his enemies, his so-called enemies, which is anybody who disagrees with him. So I learned just a tremendous amount from being by Richard's side through so much history. We visited 11 African countries together, and I write about that. I was so happy as this book was going to print, and I was continually packing. I found a letter that I had written to my children from that trip, a 4-page letter describing what we were seeing, and I actually made the publisher stop the press to print this letter because the result of that trip was that we came face to face with the ravages caused by AIDS in Africa. And the result of that was that Richard forced the Security Council of the United Nations to deal with a health issue for the first time. And everybody opposed that, including our dear friend Kofi Annan, who said, no, the UN does not deal with health issues. And Richard, being Richard, prevailed. And as a result, AIDS has been differently dealt with. It has been dealt with as a matter of international security. So these are just a little taste of what the book is, and you can see why I couldn't write a book proposal, because there are too many threads, as there are many threads in any life. I have been very gratified by the reaction that it's provoked in the United States, and in the few days that I've been here, it's been wonderful for me to I have to say, particularly this is very sexist, forgive me, the women interviewers really get into the whole complexity of a woman's story, a woman who's trying to hold on to her dreams, her ambitions, her professional life, at the same time as trying to maintain. Let's face it, these guys were pretty high maintenance, keeping marriages and families going without giving up who you are. I think that speaks more still to women than to men. But I didn't write it for women. I wrote it for human beings. Thank you very much for your attention. Thank you. Or we can go straight to the book signing.
Yeah, we can go straight to the book signing.
Yeah. Does anybody have any questions? Or I know you want to start reading the book. Well, thank you very much for your very warm reception. It's not easy to talk about this.
Well, thank you, Kati. It's a wonderful privilege. You're invited to a book signing right outside.